creationist version, chronological history that we cannot keep up with in some ways, and at the same time he's, of course, warning against the fascistic, tendencies, and actual immersion at that point by 1940. Although this was a 20-year project for him that Arendt does not really talk about in her introduction. I mean, we can go back to the introduction, but I just wanted to set a kind of frame here. Yeah, I'm putting up, Benjamin thought capitalism was a religion, right? He actually follows Tawney in this regard, that it's a religion without a dogma. It has no dogma, yeah, to it, right? It's a cult, right, which celebrates its moment always, right? So both as a, cult without a dogma, celebratory cult, sans dogma, and it's also it's a cult which bestows guilt, i.e. debtor society. Cult that, instead of change. Instead of both reform and change. And I think that both are, these are different. I would say modification versus change, but both is against. Certainly, it'll modify minimally, but never really change. Then transformation's impossible. And then finally, the negative theology, God is not dead, they've used, right? they could care less, and it's progressive and linear time what they're interested in, whereas God, for Benjamin, becomes embedded in the destiny of the people. And this may be talking somewhat to the theological moment, right? So the negative theology it purports, right? And Benjamin confronts that with an embeddedness. It never transforms the people, but leads them, right? This kind of negative, theology, if you will, right? In many ways, right? So this is interesting too. So capitalism is a religion. I'm pointing also, if you will, to this notion of the state of emergency. This became active in German thinking with Carl Schmitt, the jurist, who's basically responsible for writing the Constitution. The post-Weimar, some of the Third Reich. It's a very, very controversial figure. The three main figures of conservative revolution, to my mind, in terms of thinking: Carl Schmitt in the political sphere, Heidegger in the philosophical sphere, and Ernst Jünger as both a practitioner, writer, and probably the most Nietzschean of all of them. Actually lived the life of the Übermensch in terms of the warrior, right, etc. So these were the three major figures of conservative revolution, which are never really taught that way. You either just read Heidegger, you don't read Heidegger alongside Jünger, and you don't read Schmitt alongside, Heidegger either. And so, of course, the Frankfurt School and Benjamin on this notion of the state of emergency is transforming this for. You need the door closed? Is that what the idea is?
I just don't want to interrupt you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. The state of emergency, Benjamin reverses in a reversal of the dialectic to say we're living in a constant state of emergency, but a very different one on behalf of the exterminating angel of capitalism, if you will, or in terms of the dwarf, historical materialism, moving the strings, etc. So anyway, this is important to keep in mind. I mean, I like to, at least in my reading of the text, to kind of know where the references are and where the debate is at the time. So Benjamin is taking on this fascist thinker, Schmitt, which he and Brecht did for a very long time, for the whole period of Weimar. And then I just put up something, I was thinking about this, about his notion of time, and I mean it's more sophisticated than this, but these are just markers for you. Time as the past is a field of reference for Benjamin. You know, Beth was telling me before this class started about Arendt talking about Benjamin as collector. Well, Benjamin's parents, his father, was an art and antique dealer. So this goes with the family. He was wealthier than Stanley said, you know, at least in the family. It was a very, very much of a, you know, high-end, you know, very upper middle class, what we call upper middle class, bourgeoisie.
With all the cultural fixings.
And all with the cultural, yes, accumulation and commodities. So he lived in this world and he collected things. And he was a major book collector. I mean, a major book collector like Freud. They both collected, you know, Freud liked to collect antiques too and books, but Benjamin was a major book collector. Yeah, yeah.
The other aspect of it too was recognizing that his grandparents, one was Orthodox Jewish and the other one was Reform.
Yes.
And so now the conservative would be in the middle, but the Reform, I think, my reading, my understanding is closer to like a Lutheran type of way of thinking. That's my thoughts. But as far as religion goes. But there's going to be a big difference in those two aspects of Judaism, I think, in terms of how
let me just I'll speak to that for a second. I've done a little work on this since I have an ongoing interest in practice with Spinoza. You know, Maimonides is the one, Moses Maimonides in the medieval period, 13th century, is the one who actually developed the allegorical interpretation of biblical texts. And this was modeled in most of the synagogues and, you know, even underground. And even Kabbalah kind of came out of this allegorical interpretation in many ways. And Benjamin was actually educated in Kabbalah as well, you know, through Sholem and in discussions. So they knew this, you know, very well. The friend to the word, and I think I mentioned last week that the Adamic notion of the giving of names is Benjamin's real philology. He likes the giving of names, right, as was done in the Adamic, you know, biblical sense, right? It's not really about a different kind of theory of language. It's very, very Judaic in that sense, or the giving of names, right? So Benjamin is very, very close to this in a way, and he writes on, you know, German tragic drama, which was filled with, you know, allegory. This is his early work. At the same time, Spinoza came along and actually tried to allegorize these kind of interpretations. I mean, Spinoza claimed that the Jews were not the chosen people. One of the ideological reasons he was kicked out of the synagogue, I think also because he had associations. Well, I mean, you don't go in the synagogue and say you're not the chosen people, especially in the 1650s and 1660s. So anyway, but you know, you can see both working in Benjamin. You know, the kind of fields of knowledge in Spinoza's, you know, tiers of knowledge, as well as the analytic that's going on in Spinoza, because Spinoza was much more careful about the reading of the Bible through an analysis rather than the allegory. Yeah. So, you know, you would take a story like Cain and Abel and not only allegorize it, you would analyze it. What was the historical moment of this? What actually happened in terms of this, you know, forgiveness of brother killing brother? What does this really mean? So Spinoza had a very different stake in this. So I think both of them, so in this kind of split, you know, a lot of the tradition, the Judaic tradition, how does one interpret Scripture? You know, what is these readings, etc. Right?
Which is where I'm overstating it. That's what I was thinking in terms of reform.
Yeah.
As compared to conservative, which would be somewhere in between.
Right. Well, anyway, I think that, you know, Benjamin is a very strange mix to my mind. Unlike Adorno, who's a heavy-handed, you know, relentless dialectician, critical dialectician, Benjamin has this really, you know, still this relationship to the theological or to, you know, the Judaic tradition that Adorno never really touches in an active way. Yeah, please.
It's kind of an embarrassing question.
Yeah, that's all right. No.
But in reading the introduction and the criticism of people not being dialectical enough, I mean, my understanding of dialectical is very, you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that sort of thing.
But what is the criticism?
What is the criticism what does she mean, for instance, or people mean by saying that someone was not dialectical enough?
Well, I mean, it depends on, I mean, this is a big whole course,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah. And, you know, yeah, Stanley actually did Adorno's Introduction to Dialectics
Okay.
last year. I mean, if you think of dialectics only triadically,
Yeah.
you know, in terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, you're really missing the boat. You're missing the movement and the tensions between terms. And without a notion of the principle of contradiction, which is really the beginning of dialectics,
Yes.
right?
But
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
in
yeah.
very simple terms,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it about criticism, though? Is that another term for criticism?
Well, that's the movement is
Yes.
part of the critical. The critique is part of the movement of dialectics.
Okay, I cut
So
you
you
off.
can
Go
have a
ahead.
critical dialectic that is moving, right? But you can also have a dialectic that becomes positive or negative. There are many, many
Yeah.
moments within this kind of thing. I mean, dialectic comes from the Greek, you know,
Yes.
Plato, which means the art of conversation.
Yes.
This is not what Marx meant by it, right? It was a methodological, you know, tool that would say that the method of how you present something is different from the method of research. And this tension that is going on, the presentation itself, is more of the, you know, the relationship to that research that one was doing. And this is what one begins to see in Capital, right? He
Okay.
talks about the Darstellung,
Yes.
you know, the form of presentation. And the good thing about the German, the Stellung, the whole family means a constellation. It's a you know, a cluster of something. So this is always being grasped in the whole, in the totality, if you will. There's always something being grasped in the totality. So, for example, I mean, I'm going to talk about this again today a little bit in the second class, but Georgi Lukács is the first Marxist commentator and philosopher to privilege the fetishist character of the commodity as the starting point for reification. The world is an agglomeration of commodities, not human beings, not natural history or whatever, but to Lukács, the starting point is the world of commodities and commodification. And one must see this in its totality, how this relationship, this term hides so many moments. The extraction of surplus value, labor power, all these relations that make, you know, the commodity, and how it gets divided into use value and exchange value. You know, so dialectics always has as its starting point the force of the contradiction. And how do you unfold that and unconceal it? Yeah, Beth, I'm sorry.
No, I just thought Marx was the first one, because you
Well,
said
yes, I'm
capital,
talking about in the tradition of
commodity.
commentary. Yeah,
Okay.
since the Jewish question is up, Marx is the, you know, the scripture, and then we have all these commentaries and interpretations, you know, yeah, in some ways. Yeah, Marx, of course, was the first to look at the commodity as that. Yeah. And there's debates about that too, about Marx in terms of again, in the second class, we'll go there with Althusser, who says, forget the part on the commodities, that's a given. Let's begin with the transformation of money into capital, you know, because that's his real object, his capital, not so much just the commodity. You know, so this is another level of dialectics. And of course, look, again, it could be another whole course, right? I mean, this is a word that is very difficult to work with, but there is a whole tradition in different types of dialectics too, the debates that are going on about what the dialectic is and how it works in history, right? And, you know, but in terms of contradiction, there are formal contradictions that you see in language, you know, which very good English teachers are good at picking up in terms of, you know, papers, right? The pragmatic contradiction, the contradictions among things and how they work in the world, and then of course the rational contradiction, does it stay, you know, according to the principles of reason? And, you know, then of course you have Hegelian dialectics, Kantian dialectics, and Marxist dialectics. And what is the relationship of Marx to Kantian, you know, and Hegelian dialectics? So anyway, to make, it's a very, very long story,
Yes, I can see
and that I can't really, you know, reduce only to a nutshell. But to go back to this is dialectic his way of going about dialectics, which is the dialectical imaging. So the past becomes a field of reference, and it becomes, the past is a way of measuring between, the past and present, right? For Benjamin, this is his collecting at work, I think. And then the way past, the past appears as an object of acknowledgement, as an image, as a quote, as a citation. Benjamin, as I mentioned, I mentioned this, I know Stanley knows, said I could write a book of quotations. That was his major ambition, was to write a book just filled with citations, quotations, in a sense. Image, quote, object of art, a commodity. You can put other things in here, but these are our measuring, and also our ways of the past appears to us. And then the present, that's understood through temporal knowledge. We become aware of time, consciousness of time. In the moment of knowing, we see the potential and then the possibility of redemption. How we're going to save the phenomena back here. How do we save these anchoring points of reference in our history, and how do we relate to them? So this is really how he begins to see this. Again, this capitalism is always dealing with linear and progressive theories of time. It's not only social democrats that have an idea of progress. Capitalism is the one that really has the idea of progress. Right? Yeah, and progressive time. And it's linear. Capitalism never talks about, talk about business cycles, but that's still linear. When you really think about this, not Vico's cyclical theories of time, of ages, or epochal constellations of time, or time as potential or possibility of redemption. So he's kind of going there, and I know I'll go to the text. I just wanted to orient some of the more crucial concepts here. Not that I'm covering all of them by any means, right? It's a very dense text. Like I said, he worked on this for 20 years. It got into the hands of Arendt. Some of his papers were completely lost, to the ashcan of history, right? But Arendt gave these papers to Adorno, probably, begrudgingly, who knows? Anyway, yeah.
So
Yeah, sure.
Adorno wrote this book, Minimum Moralia, which is like aphorisms. Was that like in any way due to the influence of Benjamin in terms of the short snippet segments, like quotations?
I think his inspiration there, it was
From
a dual inspiration, was Benjamin and Marcel Proust as remembrance of things past. And you can read Proust in here, time recaptured, the remembrance of things past, right? Swann's Way, right? You have many levels here of this massive, text of modernity that Lukács never touched, unfortunately, in terms of his writings. Man Without Qualities, that are no longer in the modern mass age, which was bemoaned both by conservatives and leftists. People don't have qualities anymore. They're quantitatively this way, part of the icy rule of egotistical calculation and rational mechanization. Right? So this becomes another way of engaging, right? The commodity, commodity, and Benjamin looks at the fetish through the Arcades project, where you can take any object and you show the relationship you have to it. What was the magic of that? How did it call to you? Etc. So Benjamin becomes kind of like a psychologist, if you will, of the commodity fetish in a different way. Zimmel is the psychologist of money. What does money feel is? So you have these German minds, Zimmel on the one hand, who take this the way of money, and Benjamin to take it the way of the objects in the world. So Adorno, going back, the other influence is Nietzsche, because Nietzsche wrote in this beautiful style of aphorisms. Yeah, and particularly Beyond Good and Evil, right? Zarathustra was a book they all read. The Fragments, Will to Power, I'm not so sure that they read that. Lukács looked at that, but he only saw about 400 of the headings rather than the 1,060 that Walter Kaufman somehow ultimately put together at Princeton in the late 50s, early 60s, and completely depoliticized Nietzsche. Because the will to power was a kind of prolegomena of aphorisms towards a new Machiavellianism. You know, it's kind of interesting from Nietzsche's standpoint, which was conservative aristocraticism, radical aristocraticism. So you have to keep these things. I mean, look, I'm trying to, do this, quote, dialectically, if you will, that there's another side to this. It's not only the tradition of the Frankfurt School, but it's also the Frankfurt School in dialogue with the Schmidts, the Jungers. Adorno's foil is Heidegger throughout his whole life. It's always Heidegger he keeps coming back to, because Heidegger, at this point in the 1920s, was the master thinker. This was the master thinker of Germany, Yeah. And in the poem Paul Celan, death is a master from Germany. That's a kind of, veiled reference to Martin Heidegger, in some ways. So to keep this in mind. So on the one hand, he's responding here on the concept of history to the writing of history from a conservative standpoint, the state of emergency in Weimar. Going back to George's, the man without qualities, to make that reference, and et cetera. He's working on that level. He's also working on, capitalism as a religion. This is constantly going through. It's with a cult. This is what capitalism ultimately becomes. Show me the money. That's the cult, right? You begin to see this. Yeah. All the sports world, what they talk about 90% of the time is not the athletes and their performances, but the status of the contracts, right? Just think what Jacob deGrom's going to get.
Well,
your friend.
With the new general manager.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Who is an agent instead of a.
Right. He's not a baseball person. Right. He's an agent.
He's an agent.
That's right. So anyway, the celebratory nature of it. You see de Blasio and Cuomo very happy to give Jeff Bezos $1.7 billion, right? And you talk about a good image, Bezos taking the helicopter with gobbles of money in the New York Daily News. That was the best image of the week in his dominant media.
That was the best pun.
Yeah, the best pun. Yeah, exactly. And then the cult of guilt, right? I mean, really in a sense, the whole credit debitor economy is built on this, right? In the capitalist sense, right? Because instead of, you cannot reform or change things, and then the use of God is dead, right? The Nietzschean, Feuerbachian pronouncement probably went on much earlier than that, because philosophers were always good at hiding their, quote, atheism or anti-theism. So anyway, I hope this gives you something. And I said, you can compare this to the Arcades project, which I recommend reading. It's very good reading. Just to think about, and also maybe to think it through in terms of your own life. What objects do you have, fetishized relationships to, and, how would you write today's, from Dislandia now to Amazonalandia, or whatever we're going to call this, in Long Island City and, Arlington, Virginia. Northern Virginia, awful place. Anyway. Yeah, so I mean, I think these are values for us to kind of think about. So yeah, and going back here again, this question, and I know, I mean, there's a great essay if you're interested in literature called "Spatial Time in Modern Literature" by Joseph Frank, and it's an understanding of how the experience of time and space completely was transformed by Einstein, of course, in the Principles in 1905, and then again when he wrote the theories later. I think it was 1915 was the second paper. But anyway, how this played out in literature, Proust recapturing time from the past, right? Proust, suffered. He went into a cork-lined room and just wrote the memoir, 2,000 something pages, right? Joyce, you take the Odyssey, I mean, and you transform this into one day in the life of a man in Dublin, right, wandering around, Leopold Bloom, who was actually modeled on the Italian novelist Italo Suevo, who's worth reading, who was in Trieste when Lenin and Joyce were both there. Yeah, please.
I
I'm
got
sorry.
a good feel
Yeah.
for it too
Yeah.
in Buddenbrooks.
Yeah,
Just in terms
Buddenbrooks,
of
the early
traveling
Thomas
to the
Mann.
mountain,
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
Or there in the Magic Mountain.
Right.
Either or both.
Yes.
Is in there, yeah.
Yeah. And Mann was, very central
Friend
both
with
to
Adorno.
to Adorno and to this group. I mean, Mann was a high level. The Mann family were all writers: Klaus, Heinrich, and Thomas. Yeah, we're all major figures. So again, you have to kind of. I mean, I think at least for my purposes, I mean, you look at a text like this and you say, well, what gave it birth, right? What makes it so prescient, both for us, but in its time. Thank you. What made it so prescient in its time? And I like what Arendt did, because she said that Benjamin, and this is interesting, and I'm going to do this later today too, but she says that Benjamin had a grasp of the phenomena, the primary phenomena. And this is what he's really good at, grasping the experiential, something we really don't have. And in German, there are two words for experience, and it's very, very important. Erlebnis, which means your actual lived experience, your subjective experience. But the other one is Erfahrung, E-R-F-A-H-R-U-N-G, which is really the objective experience, something you really don't touch. Something that they say, well, it's been your experience, but it's not really your lived experience, right? So this is outside, in a way. So she's really looking at this, and this is something that Benjamin, he wrote on the concept of, poverty, but he also wrote on the concept of experience early on, in which he talks about these things too. And experience and violence, because his name, Walt, right, Gewalt in German, and he loved these plays on words, means violence. Yeah, so he also, is very interested in violence, both divine and human violence. So he has a very beautiful essay to go back to this, fourth thing about religion, capitalism, but the negative theology. And again, to my mind, he's a strange amalgamation. He's got, the Sholem and the ongoing correspondence. At the same time, he's involved with a Russian actress who is militant as can be, but is Christian. She's an Orthodox. She's a Russian Orthodox. Ajal Alakas is his love of his life. He also has this relationship to the reading of Marx, obviously, through the reading of Capital, the relationship to Brecht. They were very close to each other, very, very close. Another kind of moment in his history. The relationship, and Stanley didn't go there, I was surprised he didn't, the Collège de Sociologie in Paris. He was a member of the Collège de Sociologie, who had such eminent luminaries like Roger Caillois and Georges Bataille during this period, where Bataille wrote The Theory of Religion, and Benjamin was there, as part of this working group, which is a pretty amazing group, while Kojève was giving lectures on Hegel. So this is a very rich history, so it's kind of hard to just reduce him that he's Judaic tradition, he's Marxist, etc. I mean, I think it's a very reductionistic reading. To my mind, he is one of the great historical materialists of the imaginative, probably the most. I mean, I have rankings. I do this like for baseball, for sports stuff. Heidegger's the most violent thinker of the century. Adorno's the most intelligent, and Benjamin's the most creative of the three figures of the Weimar period. Right? Heidegger just does violence to language in order to set it into this new kind of grouping. And Adorno, obviously, when you read this stuff, just intelligence in every paragraph. In my book, and he does this on purpose. And then Benjamin, his creativity is always working through. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You said he was the premier historical materialist of the
creative school. Yeah. But yeah. Lukács of the more militant school. I mean, I'm just trying to, give markers here. That's all. That's not to be taken as dogma gospel or anything, beyond that of just, little markers. So anyway, we can go to the text. I mean, I don't know, I had a few other notes. You have to remember too, in Messianic time, you have, well, the utopian time, of course, is the directed time to the future, right? You have the restorative time, which is a kind of rethinking and a retaking of the past as restorative time. And then, of course, conservative messianism, that somehow the kingdom of heaven will fall to earth, right? Something like that, or, or there will be no more earth in the kingdom of heaven. So you have these kind of notions of the conservative, the restorative, and the utopian in terms of time. And then just one other thing, and then we'll go to the text. Kairos, which is full experience, and look, I'm not one to say go home and study systematic theology by Paul Tillich, but Tillich has some things that are used by the left. Kairos is one. This is a concept he develops as full time. Tony Negre takes this up in the 1990s in the book called Time for Revolution. Yeah, so it's interesting, Kairos as a full sense of time, and this is played off of the linear time, right? And empty time of capitalism. Yeah. So this is a very interesting moment in Benjamin, and you have this Jetzeit, right, the now time, and then the Jetzet Sein, the being of the now as well. So now time here for Benjamin is the transformation of linear time into fuller time. Against the empty.
That's the Nunc.
The Nunc-Stans, yes. Well, the German word for Nunc-Stans, the Latin, is the Jetzeit. Yeah.
Oh, Jetzeit.
Jetzeit, yeah, Jetzeit, right. So this is interesting in a way, and this term kairos has come back into currency. For a while it was not in any currency at all in terms of discourse on the left. It's Negre who brings it back in a book called Time for Revolution. Yeah, I mean, which I recommend. We're going to read it in the other class later, hopefully before Christmas, right? So, it becomes, of course, Benjamin's very well aware of eternal recurrence of the same in Nietzsche, that the same will continue to repeat itself, right, in a way, and that the real task is to go beyond that, right? That's the overcoming of time, and the time of the now. Right, into something different, etc. So he's also, speaking on the concept of history, a new way of experiencing time, or that we have to do that in terms of any kind of revolutionary practice. We definitely have to do that. So anyway, okay. So I don't know, where did we leave off last week? I mean, we can go to the text. I mean, I hope this helps a little bit.
I think it did.
Yeah.
3, right?
Yeah.
We read through up to 3 out loud?
Yeah, let me just say one other thing. I'm sorry, I had made a few notes, and I have something else sort of important vis-a-vis dialectics. The dialectics for Benjamin is more a dialectics of now and then, temporally, okay? It is not a dialectic of just, past and present. The now and the then, the now and the then. Is always working in this dialectical tension, or between one and two.
Yeah, they shape one another.
Shaping each other
Perceptions
constantly
of one another.
in terms of this movement, right? And it does so through image. I want to impress. Image thought, right, is Benjamin in many ways. Image thought. This is his contribution, in my opinion, to the Frankfurt School's thinking. It's through the dialectics of scene, which is a good book, by the way, by Susan Buck-Morss, if you're really interested in Benjamin and expanding, your
image thought is just idea, right?
What's that?
Idea is the translation of image thought, right? That's basically what an idea is, image thought.
Yeah, an idea is basically an image.
History,
To a degree. Yeah.
Sorry,
I mean, the eidetic reduction is really being able to understand what your consciousness is doing in terms of a reductive glance at objects in the world. Right, that's another thing too.
Mm-hmm.
See, part of our problem reading this stuff is that, the German language is much richer philosophically. It is the philosophical language of our era, right? And the terms, we just say objects in the world, but the Germans have distinctions. The Gegenstand is something that stands outside of us, kind of almost imposes itself, kind of strikes us from outside unwittingly, whereas in the object world, we have a relation to it. So the Nuemel in Kant is kind of like the Gegenstand. You probably saw Heidegger using this Gegenstand versus Objekt in what is called the thing. What is a thing? So, yeah. Anyway,
Sorry, the book
so
you mentioned,
Dialectics of Scene, Susan Buck Morse, M-O-R-S-S.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
I was
Yeah.
wondering if maybe
Yeah,
you could
sure, yeah.
elucidate what Arendt, and I was also wondering what you might think of it as an artist, because I'm not sure I understand it. On page 48, the end of the last paragraph, when she says what mattered to him above all was to avoid anything that might be reminiscent of empathy. And then she quotes him, "No poem is intended for the reader, no picture for the beholder, no symphony for the listener." I'm not sure I understand how that fits.
Where is this?
48.
Oh, when he talks about the task of
It's
the translator.
her.
Yeah, but she's quoting from him.
Yeah.
His essay called "The Task of the Translator."
Well, what does she...
Okay, so this is what Benjamin is saying about the impossibility of translation.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really about the impossibility of being able to translate, right? Because part of the problem, what has happened to the Frankfurt School, and George knows this doing graduate work and PhD in sociology, is Habermas. Habermas thought we really could go into this level of communicative rationality. The Frankfurt School's turning over their grave, because he was the heir apparent at that time in Frankfurt, right? No accident, as Peter likes to point out, that Marcuse died at Habermas's house. The joke is he points to get him out of the way. But anyway, this whole thing about communicative ethic and communicative action that Habermas builds this extremely elaborate system on. She's critiquing this in advance. I mean, she doesn't know Habermas. I mean, she knows who Habermas is, but she's not, when she writes this, Habermas has not written his major quote, magnum opus. Yeah, please.
I got in trouble because of Habermas. When he spoke at the Graduate Center, I asked a question. He was right. He was talking about multiculturalism, and which I didn't think I still would maintain. What did he have to know about multiculturalism?
Right.
But I asked him a question, whatever it was. He couldn't answer it. And the next day I was teaching at Stevens Tech, and the chair there had been there, and she was impressed, by the question. But at the Graduate Center, when I was getting on the elevator, it was, "Oh, the graduate student who challenged Habermas." And so it's just a little anecdote on the side.
Yeah.
But the Blue Book was a big one.
Yeah, but going back to this, with easily communicated empathy, right, in a way,
Easily.
Yeah, that's what she is, or could be communicated to the red, and
Cheap empathy.
and she's quoting from his thing. No poem is intended for the reader, so it's very hard to understand as a translator what's being meant by the authorial intention, right? No picture for the beholder. A painter doesn't sit there and say, "I'm going to paint you a starry night," right? Or no symphony, just for the audience and the listener. So he's using this to talk about almost the impossibility of translation, or the translation always is a betrayal. In the Latin, I forgot transitori, right? You're always betraying the actual text.
Traduttore,
Right.
And that doesn't even talk about criticism.
Who doesn't? I'm sorry.
Well, that doesn't even talk about
Right,
criticism,
criticism,
about the
okay.
role of the critic,
Yeah, the role of the
particularly in
critic.
the arts.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, she goes on to talk about in the introduction then his ambition to be the premier literary critic and the literary criticism there, right? And then this whole thing that I mentioned earlier about he's a philologist of names, not a philologist of sentence structure and grammar. He's not Plato, but Adam, right? Yeah, in a way. And this speaks to a very different kind of dialectic, of philology of dialectics, a dialectical philology instead of, you know, a dialectical
She says this
conversation.
interesting thing, the Greek polis will continue to exist at the bottom of our political existence, that is, at the bottom of the sea, for as long as we use the word politics.
Right, so will the police, which comes out of polis.
Never
Right.
thought about that.
Right. So, anyway, yeah, so where did we leave off? Number 3? We did that out loud, or we
Yeah.
kind of jumped a little bit, I think, yeah.
I was actually,
Yeah,
I mean,
please,
kind of
yeah.
on Beth's idea.
Yeah, no problem, yeah.
You know, there is a segment about the angel of death,
Right,
Oh, yeah, good stuff.
the Paul Klee
Yeah.
painting, Klee.
the Angelus Novus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, I wonder how much he really, like, how much did Klee sort of think or anticipate this moment that, in this painting, that Benjamin kind of puts onto it in a way, you know? Like,
Well, that's hard to say.
I know.
Yeah, of course,
I know.
because sometimes the literary critic does more of the creative work after the creation.
Yeah.
And in this case, maybe he's giving it much more of a significance, right, as a point of reference.
Right.
That's another reason why I put up time this way. I was trying to think this through. How do we use time as anchoring reference points, you know? How do we break up linearity and chronology? How do we acknowledge this in the past, right? So, yeah, please.
And, you know, and Plato, you know, for instance, he thought that the artist, I mean, he wrote in the Apology, right? I wrote this in my note here. Everyone present would have spoken better about the poets, that about their own poetry, than the poets themselves.
Right.
You know,
That's Socrates in the Apology. Yeah.
for they say many noble things, but know nothing of what they speak, in a way.
Right. That's Socrates criticizing.
The artist.
Socrates goes on a journey,
Yeah.
and when he's told he's the most wise
Yeah.
of all, so he tells the Athenian jury during his trial, well, I tested myself. I did not just accept this, that I was the emissary of Apollo and I was the wisest of all. So I went out. So I chose a politician, a statesman, I chose a craftsman, and I chose a poet. And this is exactly what he says about the poet.
Yeah.
They don't know of which they write. They don't know the theory of it. They don't know the technique, the craft. Yeah. So this is something that maybe, you know, he's doing here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but the interesting thing here is the forward and the backward glance, the Janus face, which again is theological, but at the same time has this kind of new relationship of past and present, the now and the, you know, the then. The dialectic of history is both the now and the then, you know, yeah. I mean, I listen to a lot of jazz, so I hear a lot of the now, right, but I hear the then, always. I'm always coding it this way, and, you know, like if Stanley and I go to a thing, Stanley will start right away, oh, that's so-and-so, you know, in the middle of the performance, referencing the persons that, you know, the guy's riffing on. But in a way, I mean, it's interesting, you know, we do this all the time, you know, and, you know, we talk about if it's derivative, is it original, is it innovative, etc. You know, but this is also the problem in our era, which in the work of art in the age of technical reproducibility, is that we get into this process now of everything's reduplicated. We're at this dialectical standstill, right, in terms of the creation of new images for the radical imagination, new, you know, new forms and forms.
Yeah.
We're the
Instruction,
forms of the
yeah.
imagination we're really struggling with, and everything becomes digitalized. We're in a kind of no man's land of new forms of positivism in the worst sense.
But doesn't real art, I would like your perspective, doesn't real art challenge that? Real art, I mean original art, the sculpture.
I mean, it depends
The
on how you
person
think
that
about art. you
can't
know?
reproduce the art.
I mean, it depends on what you think of the, you know, what an art is trying to attain in a way. I mean, like art could be catharsis, for instance, you know, in the sort of classic conception of it. Could be, there could be, you know, some notion of sort of a post-structuralist art in a way that would sort of challenge the structural notions of art altogether. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to sort of define exactly what its prerogative is, actually.
Yeah.
And it's historically influenced.
Yes.
So,
And
heavily
I would add to
historically
that, I mean, to the radical mind, is art been reduced only to statement? Does it no longer really subvert the dominant consciousness? Has all the subversion of the dominant consciousness already taken place, and now we live in an era of where art just becomes statement to us, right, in some ways,
Yeah.
and no longer underneath the subversive, or the overturning of certain categories in order to produce the new, in a way,
Yeah, I mean, we've got The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui being shown
Yes,
yet
right,
again.
again,
Yeah.
yeah.
that
I mean, it
classic
can be
stage,
lend
if
itself
anybody's
to new
interested.
interpretation,
Yeah.
new nuances,
Right.
etc. But is that really new,
Yeah.
in a sense? Or is that just a new, in a way? Is it shattering the form itself? Whereas Joyce rewrites the Odyssey for neoliberal capitalism. I mean, this is the end of liberal capitalism. Is Ulysses, really?
Yeah.
When you think about it, it's the life of an ordinary man in 24 hours in Dublin. It's completely fragmented, scattered, right, in a sense. And it's through this consciousness, these techniques of stream of consciousness, all these things that are unheard of in the ancient world, right? And then become new forms of experimentation. And then you have it. Then you have Burroughs, who comes along with a cut-up model, thing. So you can look at every form of the novel, poetry. You look at Cummings versus traditional Eliot, right? Or Pound versus Eliot in a certain way during the Pound era. Even though he's a fascist, he's a great poet. In some ways. Or Celine, Death on the Installment Plan, which tells you more about capitalist, guilt and a religion than it really is. I mean, the French word mortgage is to gauge your death. So I mean, I think these are very important questions that Benjamin works out somewhat, or is raising in terms of mass art, because he thinks technical reproducibility has a very positive dialectical function. Or as Godard said, everybody will have a movie camera, right? Well, he was right.
And we do.
We do, right? And we do,
Yeah.
right?
And
So,
we send it out.
Right. So again, I mean, at least to my mind, this whole thing of temporality is really in question now, because do we really have the now and the then operative, or is it just now time in terms of a new chronos brought to you by the FANG economy, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix and Google, Alphabet, No accident that, Google changed its name to Alphabet.
Why does that put temporality in question?
Well, because it's a new kind of now time, new part. Not temporality itself, it just becomes a now time without the them.
Everything is
Right.
now without
Yeah,
them.
exactly.
Okay.
Everything
Like
becomes.
the Kantian succession of now points
So
instead
now
of the
points.
cyclical.
That's right.
Or concentric.
Right. No
version.
concentricity anymore, no dialectical circularity. There's no more, thinking in terms of tensions, right? Very the digital analog distinction really doesn't work in most people's mind. It's just digitalized, et cetera.
And
You can-
constant.
correlative, in terms of your movements, right?
And constant co-opting.
Yes, right.
Stick with this
And
a
there's
little
no
longer,
space.
Michael,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
as far as everybody having a movie camera, I complained a couple weeks ago about how I can't take a picture other than how it's being set up for me in the camera. There's no depth of field, there's
right.
no focus changes, there's none of that.
Well, that depends on what kind of camera.
Well, you'd have to buy it,
Yeah.
but I'm saying in terms of the...
You have to buy the camera of the then,
But,
not the now.
but in the meantime, before...
I could give you.
I got a Nikon camera.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, before, when you had just 36 shots to take, you
Right.
had to think about what
Yeah.
you were
Well, that's true
taking
too,
the
yeah,
picture.
I agree. Yeah.
Whereas now, in my neighborhood, I see people taking pictures of their breakfast.
Right.
And posting it.
Right.
Posting it to Instagram where it
Posting
gets wiped out in
Right.
24 hours.
Right.
What is,
Okay.
It's worse than that, though. Now the cameras sort of decide algorithmically what's in your picture.
Yeah.
you
Yes,
know?
it
Yeah, yeah.
decides for you.
So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You can't
know,
frame
what's
yourself.
light
You
and
have
dark.
no subjectivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
That's like
The
the next
machine
level.
does everything for you.
And in fact,
Or
there's-
you can go back and edit it, but that's
Right.
that's not the
You're
same
editing
process.
their algorithm.
Yeah,
That's
you're-
what you're doing.
and it's still not the same process as being in the moment.
And one other thing too, because I have this crummy Sony one, I bought it for $90 or $100, online, but I've been trying to take the pictures and trying to be quite. The only thing that resembles the old camera is when you click it, even though you have to wait for the image to come up, so I don't know what I got. But when you click it, it makes the sound of an old shutter, and that just annoys me too. I can't turn off the shutter sound. It's fake. Yeah.
More fake.
I don't know.
So anyway, I mean, you want to go over this 9 with
Yes.
Angelus Novus? Start with
It
it.
is beautiful, though.
So it's
It's so
actually, yeah, it is. It's so he quotes from Sholem, right? On the angel, right? My wing is ready for flight. I would like to turn back. If I stayed timeless time, I would have little luck. So a clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed, but a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm, irresistible, propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. Very beautiful. And you could read this alongside the puppet of historical materialism, the first thesis. Very interesting how they both are connected very, very, shrewdly and, creatively, conceptually here. Yeah? So, any thoughts about? This is a very beautiful, both the dismantling of the notion of progress, but at the same time that it's a storm that's coming. So you have everything here, and especially after he talks about the state of emergency connected to thesis number 8. It's very interesting to see 8 and 9 together, right? In which the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception, but the rule.
But then he says we need to create a real state
Right,
of
that's
emergency that will scare them.
Against Schmidt. Yeah. And again, the antagonists here are partially the social democrats, obviously the fascists and the fascist theorists, such as Schmidt. I'm being reductive calling him that, but he did. He contributed heavily to their constitution of the Third Reich. Anyway, and of course the Marinetti, the futurists. Right, on the other hand, of which there's nothing but progress and accelerated progress.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But the thing about the futurists to me that always kind of confused me is that it seems that people generally talk about them as being sort of emphatically about futurism, this kind of Nazi version of art in a way.
Right.
But I always read them. The two things that I'd read sort of characterized them sort of ironically talking about these things. They're not really sort of saying that they're really into it, that they were sort of saying that they were gonna, if we follow this road, we'll end up in the ditch, with the car overturned.
I understand. Yeah.
And then there was the book about eating, which is kind of a joke.
Yeah.
About just the future of eating.
Yeah. Let me just frame it this way. Just to kind of maybe keep a perspective on it. It seems to me what Benjamin sees in the futurist, and I think he hears you and and understands that part, but it's the accelerated time that it goes on. So speed becomes politics, right? What he wants to do is pull the emergency brake on the locomotive of history. This is what Benjamin's doing. He's actually saying we got to slow it down. we may have to create a real state of emergency, but part of that is by pulling, he uses the metaphor of the emergency of brake on history, on the locomotive of history, which of course is Lenin's phrase, the locomotive of history, right? Right. So it's interesting. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying.
I'm not sure. I'm like not an expert on that.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that this. I'm just saying where Benjamin's coming from vis-a-vis futurism. Yeah. Speed as accelerated, acceleration, and this is a politics of speed versus a politics of the emergency brake and slowing things down to a standstill.
I just had always thought that they were sort of talking about it ironically, not sort of.
No, I hear you. Yeah.
But who knows?
But they were into, fast, they were into the movement of the machines in a way. I'm not against this either. I like driving very fast. So, I'm sorry. I know it's bad. I know. I understand the rush, so to speak. It's not good, but it is there, right? I mean, it is there, if you're conditioned that way,
For what it's worth and for any comment, I translated these things into my own little.
Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to do
my
here.
little understanding. And mine goes like this: as history's messengers or angels, historical materialists perceive progress as responsible for an unending series of catastrophes. Ironically, however, the devastating power of those very calamities prevents historical materialists from fully understanding and successfully alerting audiences to their own loss and lack of perception.
Good. I mean, I think it's also important, as Josh just did too, with what you're doing too, is to keep in mind ambiguity here. That Benjamin is always, in this kind of ambiguous space. It's not either or kind of thinking. It's both and it's again this dialectic of the temporal present and the past, if you will.
It seems to me that
now and then.
That's the beauty and power of kind of cryptic poetic writing. That there's more than one meaning.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And think of this too in the future. When I put out the utopian, as part of one of the moments of the time aspect here. That's really the not yet. That's really the futural as the not yet. The not hyphen yet. Right? Not there yet. We're still in the negative dialectic, rushing through the critique, but the yet can still come. It's still that potential or that possibility that'll be. And that's Ernst Bloch's principle of hope, that the not yet is there. That's really the messianic,
what I wanted to,
the messianic
that was
conception.
My question about the negative dialectic. Then when does when do you get to the yet?
Right.
That was taken
after
over
the negation.
Right.
In theology in the Reformed tradition by Jürgen Moltmann. In his theology of hope, he took Bloch directly.
Yes, he did.
And incorporated it into.
And Bloch wrote about this too, in terms of atheism and Christianity, and he wrote the Spirit Heritage of Our Times, which is also connected to this. Bloch is a figure that's been forgotten, really, in a lot of ways. A very, very intelligent, not part of the Frankfurt School, but certainly on the same generational moment as these, and very, very important, to think through. And also a musical composer who was better in terms of composing than Adorno. Maybe not as heavy hitting against, certain figures in music, but, someone who wrote on modern music as well. Very, very intelligent stuff. So anyway, the Angelus Novus is a strange character, right? It's looking backward and forward simultaneously, but gets caught up in the looking forward. It no longer can close its wings.
Because of the storm.
Yes.
That's the image.
The storm of progress.
The stormers get caught in her wings.
Right.
And so she can't turn around anymore.
Right.
She has to stay focused.
It's not the angel Michael. I'm just kidding. You keep saying she. It's all right. I'm just teasing.
I think it's worthwhile going back to page 12.
Sure. With Arendt, you
Yeah,
mean?
what she has to
Okay,
say
yeah,
about
sure,
it.
sure. Yeah, I'm all for this moving around the text, yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
angel.
Just that very.
Driving fast, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
The very last line, the angel
Yeah.
would like to stay, awaken the dead, and join together what has been smashed to pieces.
Yeah, she requotes him, yeah, yeah.
And then you can read forward.
No, go ahead, no, I mean, yeah, yeah.
Which would presumably mean the end of history. But a storm is blowing from paradise and irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of ruins before him grows skyward. What we call progress is this storm. In this angel, which Benjamin saw in Cleese, Angelus Novus, the flaneur experiences his final transfiguration. For just as the flaneur, through the justice of purposely strolling, turns his back to the crowd, even as he is propelled and swept by it, so the angel of history, who looks at nothing but the expanse of the ruins of the past, is blown backwards into the future by the storm of progress. And so that was just nice too. With the concept of the flaneur
Isn't it?
was a new one for me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I like that with photography too, right?
Yeah.
You have to take a picture of the group, you sort of turn your back. You sort of stand against them.
Yeah.
Blur back. I don't know.
So what does that have to say about selfies?
That's, I just wondered.
That's a good
I don't
point.
understand it yet.
Interesting.
I've never done one of those. I don't understand it.
People have died from them.
Why am I not surprised?
Yes,
Backing
never
off
done
the
one. I still have flip
buildings
phone, you know?
Me too.
Yeah.
And I take better
The
pictures.
last of the drug dealers, that's what I tell everybody.
You got a burner.
They can't trace me, right? I'm preparing for the cannabis, legitimization in the States, yeah.
You got stock in Monsanto then, right?
I have stock in Cannabis Growth,
Good.
Yeah.
Canadian company, CGC on the market.
CGC.
Aurora Cannabis and
Okay.
Tilray and Cronus. Those are the four big ones in Canada. Yeah. They all have medical marijuana. They're big in terms of creating this stuff. Canopy has the most far-reaching vision. They're vertically and horizontally integrated, medical and recreational.
Oh.
And, yeah. Anyway, I mean, I've been studying this, I went to this is an anecdote about some of my bourgeois upbringing. I went to my father and I wanted to supply the warehouses. They were in the wholesale food business. They were distributors in New Orleans. And so I went to him when I was younger. And this was like very early 70s, We just said, pile up a whole bunch of weed in this place. It's going to be very valuable one day.
And you said, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sounds like the graduate.
I said the commodity form, yeah, what's the
Plastics.
future?
Plastics.
Weed. Right. So anyway, I was way ahead of my time, legitimization, stockpiling. Yeah, anyway.
You were
It
just a
didn't happen.
stoner,
Yeah, I was a
Michael.
stoner.
You were
That's
ahead of
right.
your
That's
time.
right. No, that's
I
true.
was a stoner.
Yeah, you were
I
a
was
stoner.
ahead of my
Yeah,
time.
I got you. Okay, all right. Yeah.
Boy, that's
Yeah.
one way to pitch it.
Yes, I guess so, yeah. So anyway, this is a great little passage here about what he's really talking about, because the flaneur is a figure in Benjamin who was very, 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 very active as a walker. I mean, another main influence here is Baudelaire. I mean, I don't think you really understand Benjamin in terms of history unless you read Charles Baudelaire very carefully. And he also had a relationship to the Surrealists. Yeah. So read Paris Spleen and think about walking. I mean, this is another thing that he does very well. Or The Flowers of Evil.
That's why I brought up photography, because the flaneur is thought of as the photographer.
Oh,
Yes.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. He had a nice little the flaneur, the
Connection.
sandwich man, and the whore. A triad of the three figures, and then in 19th century, late 19th century Paris. Yeah. So he wrote these things too. So that was part of his literary stuff. We're doing his, concept of history, but his literary stuff is magnificent. His book on Baudelaire, Lyric Poet in the Age of High Capitalism, is one of the best pieces of literary criticism I've ever read. It makes Sartre look like a dumb person when in his study of Baudelaire. I mean, it's sad, but yeah. I mean, Sartre then went and wrote the Flaubert, which is 3,200 pages, 900 pages just on Flaubert's years between 3 and 5. So in an attempt to do an existential psychoanalytic, on the idiot of the family, Gustav Flaubert. But it's very interesting because these people are very, I mean, Adorno, obviously the relationship to Proust and Nietzsche, Benjamin, the relationship of Proust and Baudelaire. You know, and maybe this was part of the split. I mean, this is my hypothesis, is that Adorno never really could take to a Baudelaire. He couldn't take to the, you know, the underworld so much as a Benjamin, who had a different kind of level to this, to Paris Spleen or the, you know, Dangerous Liaisons, you know, in Lacroix's case, or in, of course, Flowers of Evil, right? You know, that Baudelaire from Adorno was kind of like, you know, not his object, right? Not his object of study or part of the experience. I mean, I'm sure he understood it, but Benjamin had a different group of authors, Poe, Baudelaire.
Kafka,
you know,
she's very insistent that Kafka
Yes.
is a major influence, but you haven't mentioned him.
Well, I mean, he is a major influence in a way, but I mean, I'm talking about, you know, the Benjamin that we don't want to really see, you know, the Benjamin of the flaneur, the gentleman who has this curiosity with the underworld of Paris, this man of the commodity fetishism, etc. Kafka was more of a, you know, the tale writer. They all love Kafka, you know, because he was, you know, you know, yeah. Safe and difficult in a way. Yeah.
And he got a job too.
Who did?
That comes through in here, that Kafka worked.
Well, he got most of his material from working in the insurance office. That's where he figured out Joseph K. You know,
Let me ask you, it's not a
You'd
silly
be at
one.
Amazon these days.
Yep.
It's not particularly silly.
Yeah.
I don't
Sure.
really kill class time on it.
No, it's okay.
But
We got
if
time.
anybody
35
rereads
minutes.
it, there were two things that lost me. On page 46,
This is Arendt again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because the essay was so nice,
Yeah.
but this was the only place I really got tripped up, and I killed an hour trying to find it.
Right.
But right at the end, when she says, "For just as the above-cited closing sentence from the Goethe essay sounds as though Kafka had written it," the following words, and she goes on. But I said I don't want to take class time on it, but I couldn't find the closing sentence on the Goethe essay, and I still was like wondering about his essay on Goethe, and that's where I got tripped up. So, like I said, I don't know if anybody picked up on that, or if you could guide. I went back. I'm looking for her reference to what Benjamin wrote about Goethe, and I just couldn't find it. So,
Yeah, I remember that. I just gave up.
You too? Okay.
I didn't know what she was talking
And then it goes on. It makes nice sense, you know. And then she really goes on and talks about the truth and so forth and so on. But it was him writing on Goethe, which also it piques my interest, because reading him finally a couple years ago was for me to introduce myself to this romantic type of feeling, because in whether it's in Werther or one of them, where his hero is crying. Yeah, I think it's in he's sobbing like the French are sobbing.
Yeah.
Whereas the German stereotype, I'd always been presented as the Nazi, and so it was good to see that they're and even reading through this, it's like we'll be saying tonight, not all Americans are white supremacists, right? But it's alive. But what she was saying about him, I just don't know.
Well, I mean, the Goethe essay isn't here.
Right.
So that's number one, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
okay.
so it's not even here. She's making a reference to it in terms of the classical tradition. But I think the point of this paragraph is how much more Benjamin has in common with Heidegger in terms of listening. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is really what this is about, in a sense, this kind of going back to the classical tradition, listening to the tradition that does not give itself up to the past, but thinks of the present. And that's a quote from Heidegger. He actually had more in common with Heidegger's remarkable sense for living eyes and living bones that could be sea-changed into pearls and coral, and as such could be saved and lifted in the presence only by doing violence to their context in interpreting them with the deadly impact of new thoughts than he did with the dialectical subtleties with his Marxist friends. So in a way, I mean, Arendt is being true to her master Heidegger here, and you know, trying to build Benjamin closer to Heidegger than he is to Adorno and Horkheimer. And you know, in this context, I mean, I think this is what she's doing.
Okay.
She's trying to take him away from, you know, yeah.
And to
This
actually,
kind of
to
thing,
finish
yeah.
her argument,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah,
section.
yeah.
If we go to 49, the end of the last paragraph is where
Yeah,
the
yeah.
summation comes. Because before you referred to the, not Plato, but Adam,
Yep.
who gave the names.
Yes.
But then she comes back, this is a beautiful essay, then she comes back to Benjamin being akin to Kafka, precisely because the latter, current misinterpretations notwithstanding, had no farsightedness or prophetic vision. And then she had also made the reference to the Jewish tradition of not prophesizing, but looking into the Talmud. But listen to the tradition, and the end here, he who listens hard does not see. And
Right.
That's like right here, yeah. Let me take my glasses off. It's and then on and on. This is like a revolving. It's a revolving essay.
Very rich.
And then we get back into polis and the politics at the bottom of the sea.
Stanley was right.
Yeah.
The essay should be right.
Yeah.
What's that?
This one.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know
no,
why I'm
this is
surprised.
one of her
Yeah.
beautiful, I mean, yeah. Yeah. No, she was a thinker, like her or not. I mean, she was a thinker and a great essayist, she-
But while we're on it,
yeah,
now the Hunchback came in the very beginning.
right.
And as far as, I was wondering if a reinterpretation of that first thesis, because it's the Mannheim who's down inside the box, right?
Right.
So there's that element of chance
Yes.
and accident, I think, that's
Right. I think I mean, when I was doing some notes on the chess player, that there's two issues there in a sense. That one is, of course, the calculated rationality, and the other is chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that Babbage who was the British mathematician, he was the one who founded the programmable calculating machine. Right, and this was going around. This was in Richmond, Virginia. This chess player, Meisel's chess player, was seen. So Benjamin's very well aware of the actual object in history, right? So there's a theory of determinate calculations, and then also the a priori deduction, that it's already determinate in the mathematical, versus the a posteriori inductions. So there's a debate here, if you will, in terms of this notion of history, whether it's moving on an a priori deductive logic, or does history move also on inductive, a posteriori. So this is a kind of interesting way of framing it in both Kantian terms and more philosophical terms.
Mm-hmm.
So and then I think I mentioned you could do this with Deep Blue today. You could think about the chess player, Kasparov playing the IBM and losing because the determinate calculability was so good in the machine with all this memory could beat the master himself, right? In a way, and how does that work? That inductive, logic has now been put back into calculable, deductive, calculation and the inferences, right? So, so this is another moment, right? That needs. I mean, we need more mathematicians on the left and more, more science, right, so to speak, because this is about mechanistic views too of history, because he may be even talking about vulgar Marxism here, another one of his consistent attacks here.
That's
Is
what I
vulgar
thought he was
Marxism, social democracy, and other, yeah. And maybe there's some irony in here. Why does it win all the time?
Why do you have to
is
kill
that the
himself,
notion?
though, Michael? Why do you have to do
Well,
it
I don't
at the
know.
age of
I mean,
48? He's
She
right there
tells
going
the
to Lisbon.
story.
I
It was
know.
a matter of
It's so close.
24 hours.
Yeah.
Either way.
Either way,
Yeah.
Right,
he either wouldn't have left
Yeah.
Paris, or he would have
Right.
known the border was closed.
right,
Yeah.
Talk about chance.
right.
Bad luck. Yeah.
It's in the
But
Pyrenees,
also the
right?
suggestion that
Yeah.
while going over the Pyrenees, he actually had
Mhm.
heart failure,
Yeah.
and so was extremely fatigued.
Mhm.
I wonder if he knew that.
Yeah, well, Yeah, there were problems with the farm. I mean, they gave him money sometimes, and they came through. But in my opinion, what really should have been done for Benjamin, and I think this was possible, they should have gotten him a position at the Warburg Institute in London. You know, Abbie Warburg would have been more than happy. The money was there. Cassira was there, who was a fellow traveler, if you will, of the Frankfurt School. He wasn't a member, but he was a major philosopher and thinker, and the great debate between Heidegger and Cassira in 1929 at Davos. Many other, Paul Oscar Christeller, who ended up in Columbia. Many of these people were there, art historians, Elwas Rigel. So why wasn't Benjamin, through all these great contacts, put at the Warburg Institute? Why couldn't they get him to London? Yeah. I mean,
why?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. Yeah. What were the problems with this? I've never seen any writing that really explains this.
Was it a lack of will on their part?
Yeah, I mean that's one explanation.
They weren't sure
obviously,
what he had
yeah,
to offer?
yeah. Or I don't know about they knew what he had to offer. I just don't think that they went the extra mile, that was necessary at that time to do it. I mean, Marie Bonaparte sold jewelry. She sold family heirlooms to get Freud across. Yeah, she sold jewelry. I mean, major jewelry to buy passage. And they asked Freud at the border, "What did you think of the Gestapo?" "I highly recommend them." Was his response. Always good at the joke still. "I highly recommend them." Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing to know in life sometimes when you're in these crises.
What did he say when asked, what do you think of either
America?
capital America? He said, I
America?
don't hate it, I regret it.
I regret it, yes. That's a great thing. I do not hate America, but I regret it. Do you hate America? No, I do not hate it. I regret it. And one of his great sayings, his great irony was always, "I was astonished to learn." I want to do a thing on our website. I was astonished to learn that Jeff Bezos got 1.7 billion.
That's the original House of Cards.
Yes.
Where
Sure.
the guy goes, I forget the line that he's...
You mean they're in collusion with each other? I'm just...
Yeah.
Yeah. I never saw House of Cards. But
No,
I
the original one.
Oh, the original. Oh, you mean the David Mamet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
Okay.
the original British...
The British
production.
The production, okay, yeah. So anyway, so you want to go back to the theses? So that's good. Eight and 9 are very much, together. And I mean, I guess you can ask yourself, obviously, is this the way history is really working? Is this storm of technological rationality taking us, blowing into the future here? Yeah, this new economy, right? Yeah, please.
I was just trying to think about this idea of empty time.
Yes.
I mean, I get full time, and with the history and sort of cyclical
Right.
aspect. But this kind of what is empty time? Like what does that imply? Or empty future in a way? Like sort of.
You got a page reference?
Yeah, I'm trying to find one. We can come back to that question.
No, it's okay. It's a good question. I mean, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No.
Sort of towards the end.
Yes, I mean, time is it begins with historical time, right? On the notion of historical time is sections 14, Thesis 14 that we mentioned last time,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, that's right.
As well, right?
Yeah.
The empty time. History is the subject of a structure whose site is not homogeneous, empty time,
Right.
but time filled by the presence of the now.
Yeah.
Thus, to Robespierre, ancient Rome was a past charged with the time of the now, which he blasted out of the continuum of history. The French Revolution viewed itself as Rome reincarnate. It evoked ancient Rome the way fashion evokes costumes of the past. Fashion has a flair for the topical. No matter where it stirs in the thickets of long ago, it is a tiger's leap into the past. This jump, however, takes place in an arena where the ruling class gives the commands. The same leap in the open air of history is the dialectical one. That's how Marx understood the revolution. Okay, you want to try to deconstruct this, or yeah.
No, I mean, I get that. Like I said, I sort of understand the historical time, or what that means, but sort of this empty time of the future, in a sense, this Kantian now points that beyond the now there is no future, is sort of how I was reading.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, but also the now of the linear, as you say, the thing, and for him that's very empty.
Yeah,
that's homogeneous time.
That's kind of like why we are where we are.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we can't envision the future.
We're always on the, one of the stupid things. I have a friend that used to use these day planners. Everything is checked off. 8:15, 8:20, 8:25. 9:30. Appointment books, calendars, agendas. All of these things are part of what Benjamin would consider empty time. Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting about this passage too was the ruling class gives the commands. I had sort of thought about Marx in Volume 1, the preface, where he says something like, the country that is more developed only shows the less developed the image of its own future.
Yes, that's right.
Something like that.
Right.
So the emptiness of the time.
Yes.
Because this is the dominant form.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the age of work of art, in the age of mechanical or technical reproducibility, that the reduplication is the major issue because it's empty.
Yeah.
I mean, when Stanley and I go to, it's funny. Oh, that's elementary Coltrane.
Right.
And he's right. It's empty time, even though it may be technically good, right, or a virtuoso performance. It's still empty to the listener that knows, the historical dialectic or has the past as part of their tradition. So this is very, very important to remember. Not that you become cynical in this. That's not the issue. The issue is the production of new forms. The cynic is excuse my language, the masturbatory, person in the market square who says, "I've seen this before," right? This is what the cynics do, right? In a sense. And I don't think he's reducing this to cynicism. He's just saying this is a reproducibility and exactly what happens in capitalism. Capitalism's run out of it. Why do we have all this technology that's recycling images from the past? There are no new images being created. There may be new techniques, right? Out of technology, but there's nothing really new. When you really think about this, you're an artist. When's the last breakthrough in art? Real breakthrough that you could place in the historicity of art.
Depends on how you think about it.
Well, I guess, no, I understand the relative remark, the remark of relativity. But when would be the last, real, new phase, if you will, or breakthrough in terms of, because what happens to Cubism, what happens to Fauvism, et cetera, right?
Always the classic is Picasso, right?
Yeah.
It's really the break.
Yeah.
And since then, we haven't really passed that point in a way. Or if we have, it's in this post.
Okay, fair enough. Can you think of anybody? There's a lot of recycled abstract expressionism.
Sure.
There's recycled figurative art. There's recycled, portrait, landscapes, right, et cetera, right? Avoid which, again, the mimetic tradition is playing out, but nothing beyond the mimetic, right? Right? Yeah. So the dialectic of the image is at a standstill in a certain way, or in Sartrean terms, in the political, the practico-inert is operative. In a sense. You become inert in the practice, right? Even though you continue to make a living, and you see a Hawking sold for $90.5 million. Front page of the New York Times yesterday. Broke the records.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you ask the question, exchange value is not static, right?
It's as much as Odell Beckham got to play for the Giants.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, go back to athletic content. Yeah. Right.
15's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. I thought he wanted to go back to New Orleans and play with a contender.
Could I just ask, before we get to 15,
sure,
about
sure.
8?
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that 8 is really, really important.
They're all important, yeah, but
in
go ahead.
terms
Yeah.
of Adorno,
Right.
and an idea that we met there about the answer to the question of what then must we do.
Okay.
It seems like he's saying that it's really the oppressed that tell us what the next step in history is. I'm thinking about that concept in liberation theology about the hermeneutical privilege of the poor, or the preferential option for the poor, or even Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. That he seems to be referencing that here. The tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception but the rule. We must attain to the conception of history that is in keeping with this insight. Then we shall clearly realize that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency, and that's what Beth was saying there too. And this will improve our position in the struggle against fascism. One reason why fascism has a chance is that in the name of progress, its opponents treat it as an historical norm.
I think that's really important.
That seems
to
real.
parse
Well,
that statement
yes.
in terms of the
Right.
current one.
Yes, absolutely, and just
Yeah.
talk about, the
Yeah.
historical norm
And
is now Trumpism and
normalizing.
corruption. Nobody really cares about corruption
Yeah.
anymore. Nobody cares about, this is all,
Or even truth. I mean,
Yeah. No,
But,
truth
but
is for
corruption
finished.
isn't new.
Right,
So
no,
like-
never
Like,
was.
why would
Yeah.
we?
Right, exactly.
Why would we consider that to be new?
Right.
It's the liberals who say corruption is new.
Right, that's right.
Bankers in government, I'm shocked.
Mhm.
Gambling in this establishment?
As Brecht once said, it's more criminal to found a bank than it is to rob one.
Yeah.
A lot of truth in that statement.
That's
Yeah.
good.
You know, Goldman Sachs was Obama's cabinet.
Yes, it was,
Yeah.
yes. And Bush's
So
too, to a
disappointing.
degree.
And Citibank was Clinton's.
Clinton, that's right. Rubin.
Rubin.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, that's what I thought he was saying in that thesis, basically was, don't pretend that is something new.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. That's the
I
caveat.
thought it was a
Yeah.
critique of social
that's right.
democracy's shock at fascism.
Right.
Oh my God, this came out of nowhere.
Mhm.
Who could have anticipated this?
But it is still. I mean, that's. I mean, people are amazed. And actually, I'm thinking way back. I think there was a book. I think the title was "How Could It Happen Here," when Greece went under the dictatorship.
You remember Papadopoulos and company.
But it was, it was that notion that the birthplace of democracy. How could you have a dictator here? Was part of that.
Well, that goes way back in their history since they became a nation state in the 1820s. Right. That was already in the formula.
But sticking with this, reading it now here today, I think maybe the caravan is a way of creating that emergency as Trump is putting troops on the border and threatening to shoot anyone who comes in.
I got a call from someone. Michael, you know who's financing the caravan? I said, that's a very good question.
Democrats.
Best question I've heard.
Yeah.
Who's financing the caravan?
Is there an answer?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but what you say, yeah. I mean, of course, they say, is Soros behind this? This is the
that was it, yeah.
next
Well,
step.
there
But
was
that's-
some
that's kind of
cynical
it.
money
Yeah, yeah.
from the political
Right,
establishment in Honduras
Right.
that actually was some of the
Okay.
initial, but it took on a life of its own, I think.
Right, sure.
But
Is that
there
like
was
asking-
oppositional money.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it wasn't like it was from Maduro, but
Right.
it was an opposition.
Right.
The way I see it, maybe this is too simple, but it's like asking who financed the Exodus from Egypt. Who did that?
The Egyptians.
Yeah, they did. Okay, yeah.
They
that's-
okayed it.
Yeah.
Freud proved that. Moses was an
Yeah.
Egyptian. Moses in monotheism. Right? He wasn't Jewish, he was an Egyptian. But, this is a great thing. You know has a great analysis of this is Stokely Carmichael. Kwame Ture on YouTube. Great analysis of Moses and monotheism of Freud. It's Very, very intelligent. You can get it on YouTube. It's a magnificent interpretation of that book. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Can you just help me with the
Yeah.
the
Yeah, I
last
don't know.
two sentences of 8?
Of
The
8.
current amazement that the things we are experiencing are still possible in the 20th century is not philosophical. This amazement is not the beginning of knowledge,
Right.
unless it is the knowledge that the view of history which gives rise to it is untenable. There's so many double negatives. I can't follow.
Right.
Double
The
negatives.
Germans are good
my
at
presence.
negation of the negation of the negation. Right. Well, first of all, he's saying that this state of emergency is something that is not a philosophical question, right, and an epistemological question.
It's not
And that
it's not a break.
Right.
Not a
And that
break.
history itself is not a question of epistemology itself, right? It's not really a question. And actually, you could raise the question, again, what he's asking here is, what is history at this point, right? What is history? Because I think he's very shrewd in his writing and extremely conscious. Because the next section is the Angelus Novus, which he gives a notion of what history would be, right? Not grounded in a science of history, but in an icon, if you will, or an image of history. So I think this is very important to keep in mind, to read it as, how it flows and organically is connected to the next thesis, how each thesis kind of unfolds into the next one, how he ordered it. Remember, he worked on this 20 years, 20 years.
20 years on the theses?
Yes, on the concept of history.
on
this here, what we have, 20 years, this is the
Really?
product of labor. So don't feel bad if you don't get any writing done right away.
Yeah, it's not that
Especially
long.
you, Chris, especially Chris, yeah.
Thank you. I knew I loved Benjamin.
Right. So anyway, yeah, he spent 20 years on thinking this through, and then, of course, numbering, et cetera, right? Yeah, so this is, these are theses, right? And they're
So
unfolded,
everything was
and it's
intended.
also modeled on Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, right? In which, the history of materialism is taken on, the traditional versus the new concepts of materialism, which opens up a new point about history, and philosophy. Philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to transform it. Not change, transform it. And I like that much better than change in English. Yeah. I mean, the French change life, changer. No, it's transform. They should have used transform, Rimbaud and all these people, right?
Because change,
Yeah.
you could change it into anything.
Exactly.
We're changing Long Island
Well, you can-
City.
Yes, well, we're transforming it already, vertically.
It's transformed already.
Yeah, it happened a long time ago.
It did. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember, yeah, I know, yeah.
No parking
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. The State Department of Environmental, the agency is there in Long Island City.
Oh, yeah.
That's where their offices are, civil servants.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
It's horrible.
And DOH
CUNY
is
Law
there
School.
too.
CUNY Law School and DOH.
Yeah.
All in that neighborhood. So anyway, I think you can read this as, philosophy is inadequate, right, in a way, to understand the state of emergency in some senses. At the same time, that we need a new, concept of history, right? That's going to be this, the now and the then, right? But the now, in a way, cannot close its wings. That's the amazing thing. It is a storm regarded. Yeah. And why I would use storm too as a metaphor, or as in this case is, of course, remember the German Romantics, storm and stress, Sturm und Drang, right? And this is Goethe.
Okay.
The whole period of German Romanticism. So a lot of his background, I think, is or consciously being reproduced here too, in terms of his thinking of the angel of history, right? So I think it's interesting that maybe we could go, since we're on time, we could go to number 14, history is the subject, what Josh was mentioning, is the subject of a structure whose site is not homogeneous empty time. It's not linear time, but time filled by the presence of the now. So now is different than quote unquote, time is different than the linear, right, in the terms of the noun, right? The present is different.
His now is different.
Yes, the present as history. And you know who takes this up very beautifully is he doesn't mention Benjamin, but he's obviously, either unconsciously or consciously influenced, is Michel Foucault. And when he does the archaeology of the present, in his work on Kant and the archaeology of knowledge. That the archaeology, the digging, right, itself, is of the present as history, which is interesting, right? So thus, to Robespierre, the French Revolution, ancient Rome was a past that we can look at, charged with the time of the now, which he blasted out of the continuum of history. And the blasting is the storm progress, right? In a way that you have to blast it out, right? These are not, quote unquote, passive metaphors here, or verbs, right?
It's violent.
Yes, absolutely. Gewalten. The French Revolution viewed itself as Rome reincarnate. Well, the Russian Revolution, viewed itself as the French Revolution Part 2. So in a way, he's playing on this without mentioning it. The Bolsheviks, what was the model? It was the Jacobins, and you see this in those of you reading the modern prints for Peter's class, in Gramsci, where you see this all over, the Jacobins, in a sense. And Trotsky, he thought he was in Thermidor with Stalin. He didn't know what had been blasted in the continuum of history. This is interesting. You start thinking about this. Trotsky was reliving this almost in the way that Benjamin says, let's not live history. He thought he was in Thermidor with what happened from 29 to 39, till his assassination. Well, he thought he was in, the kind of, period of the French Revolution where the Directoire was just doing instructions. He didn't understand, how far deeply this really went and how new it was as a new kind of form of, reigns of terror, if you will. Yeah, in many ways. I'm not saying that I'm against, some of what Stalin did, but anyway, I don't think Trotsky understood, what really was
I
facing.
misunderstand. Did you say you would see that as something new? A new.
Well, it was a new form of control, right? In a way, right? Stalin was in power from 1929 to 1953, till his death, right? A thing that thought it would. He eliminated every opponent. This was Machiavellianism at its highest and the extreme.
That's why I'm wondering why you're calling it new, or saying it's new.
Well, it was new to Trotsky because he thought he was dealing with Robespierre during the Directoire. He thought he was in Thermidor.
Okay. I see.
He didn't understand the depth of it. That's what I'm just saying. No, I'm sorry.
The double negatives here.
Yeah, double negatives. Yeah, in a way. Okay. So in a sense here, I think he's going back here to talk about this. You have to always understand, right, the now. When you blast out of the continuum of history, if something is new in that respect, right? And the same leads into the open air of history. That would be the open wings, I guess, or that the angel can take flight in the open air.
Without
is the dialectical one? Yeah, right. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
In the open, I'm just trying to imagine the figure so it's without the storm getting caught in.
Yes, without getting caught. Yes, right. Is the dialectical one, which is how Marx understood the revolution. So the revolution is the poetry of the future in this case. Yeah. I mean, one way of looking at it, right?
Well, we could go on, I think, with 15.
15 is good. The awareness that they're about to make the continuum of history explode is characteristic of the revolutionary classes at the moment of their action. The Great Revolution introduced a new calendar. This is French, right? The initial day of a calendar serves as a historical time-lapse camera. Beautiful. And basically, and when I said image, right, is another, basically it is the same day that keeps recurring in the guise of holidays, which are days of remembrance, right? Thus the calendar,
Christian time, Caritas.
Yes, that's right. Thus the calendars do not measure time as clocks do. They are monuments of a historical consciousness of which not the slightest trace has been apparent in Europe in the past 100 years. In the July Revolution, an incident occurred which showed the consciousness still alive.
What's the July Revolution?
July 14th, 1789.
Okay, the French Revolution.
Yeah, storming of the Bastille. On the first evening of fighting, it turned out that the clocks and towers were being fired on simultaneously and independently from several places in Paris. An eyewitness, who may have owed his insight to the rhyme, wrote as follows: "Who would have believed it? We are told that the new Joshuas at the foot of every tower, as though irritated with time itself, fired at the dials in order to stop the day." Now listen, to go back to Proust, Proust's project was to stop time. Yeah, I mean, really in this, I mean, this is really a very, very valuable lesson. Proust is revolutionary. The shooting, the literary form of the revolution, the actual firing on the clocks to stop time. What does eternal mean? Out of time. Eternitas really means to be out of time. You actually have killed time, in a sense, right? I think this is important, right? So, yeah. So the historical materialist, 16, cannot do without a notion of the present which is not a transition. So we're always thinking within the transition. Philosophically, to me, the transition, or the texts like difference and repetition, being an event, these are works of the transition after the great breakthroughs of the Heideggers, the Lukács's, and the Wittgensteins, right? To me, these are the works of the transition to the next level, right?
It's a threshold.
Yes, the threshold, in which time stands still and has come to a stop, right? This notion defines the presence in which he himself is writing history. Historicism gives the eternal image of the past. Historical materialism supplies a unique experience with the past, right? Okay? So this is very important. And you can read 16 in relation to both the next one, the historicism, and especially 18a of what, historicism does in terms of causal connections, right? All right, so anyway, I'll go on. The historical material leaves it to others to be drained by the whore called Once Upon a Time. You danced in your prime. You all thought you were kidding, You dressed so fine, etc. In historicism's bordello.
And I love that.
What's that?
I love that. That's such a beautiful
It is a beautiful
reference.
thing. Yeah.
The past.
Well, I use that today in some other context anyway. He remains in control of his powers, man enough to blast open the continuum of history. This is really phenomenal. I mean, because really what he's doing is he's setting up the, difference, if you will, the essential difference between the historical materialist's approach to history versus that of the historicist, right? And the traditional historian's approach.
And also between the vulgar historical,
yes, and the mechanical,
like in the first one, the mechanical.
Right. Yeah, that it's only about the motor class struggles, the haves and
All
the
you have to do is
have-nots.
set it in
A very
motion.
vulgar interpretation of Marx. Yeah. That's something that remains all the time. One little sentence of Marx plays out in terms of the notion of class, right? All right, so, very good. Let me go on. Historicism, 17, and this is crucial because this last four are really about historicism and historical materialism. Historicism rightly culminates in universal history. Materialistic historiography differs from it as to method more clearly than from any other kind. Universal history has no theoretical armature. Very interesting, right? Its method is additive. Let's add this to it. Let's do this, right, etc. And then, and once upon a time, and then, right? And summaries, right? It musters a mass of data to fill the homogeneous empty time.
Right there.
Materialistic historiography, on the other hand, is based on a constructive principle. This is crucial. Thinking involves not only the flow of thoughts, but their arrest as well. The stopping, the emergency brake, the arrest of the...
The negation.
Yes, exactly. Where thinking suddenly stops in a configuration pregnant with tensions, it gives that configuration a shock by which it crystallizes into a monad. And nobody really talks about Leibniz anymore, especially on the left. But anyway, this is what the monadology of Leibniz he's referring to. The historical materialist approaches a historical subject only when he encounters it as a monad. In this structure, he recognizes the sign of a messianic cessation of happening, or put differently, this is beautiful, a revolutionary chance in the fight for the oppressed past. A messianic, I love this phrase, revolutionary chance in the fight for the oppressed past.
What's a monad?
Whoa, this is a long one.
Never mind.
Yeah, next time.
Never mind. Oh, never mind.
It's like you have a
Doesn't
consciousness that's a window onto the world. That's a monad. If you look outside, you're windowing the world in a sense.
You get it in Spinoza too, right?
Well, they got a big argument. You don't really hear monad in Spinoza, but Leibniz said that Spinoza didn't have an inner monadology. He eliminated that. The philosopher who invented this was George Wilhelm Leibniz, right, who invented the calculus. He is the principle of sufficient reason on which all your life insurance and annuities are based. To give you an idea of how sometimes philosophy has a very practical value in the system we live under. The monad was a treatise he wrote about that the universe is composed of monads. Right? And he wrote a book called The Study of Monads, Monadology, in which a monad is really a consciousness only, right? That is like windows. You know how you used to use this stupid phrase, windows on the world, for the World Trade Center or whatever it was? Right. So you're like these little windows that have glimpses of the world, the monad, right, in a sense, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So this is, what he's trying to look at. This is what the universe is composed of, these monads, etc. I'll go more into, I'll try to, just not enough time to, go through it all. All right, so he takes cognizance of it, the revolutionary chance in the fight for the oppressed past, in order to blast a specific era out of the homogeneous course of history, blasting a specific life out of the era, or a specific work out of the life work. Very beautiful, right? Because he's got the work of art here, art meaning generically novel, poetry, painting, sculpture, etc., right? As a result of this method, the life work is preserved in this work, and at the same time it's canceled, right? In the life work, the era, and in the era, the entire course of history. The nourishing fruit of the historically understood contains time as a precious but a tasteless seed. Beautiful, huh? Yeah, poetics, Yeah. You see why he wanted to be the premier literary critic of his generation, and how, eccentric and different, right? Beautiful, huh? Yeah. The nourishing fruit of the historically understood contains time as a precious but a tasteless seed. And then he goes on to biology in the next section. But anyway, yeah. So I think the real thing here is 16, 17, 18, all the way through, is the distinction between universal history as practiced by the historicist, and that what the task of historical materialism is, and how it differs from that, and how one escapes homogeneous empty time in terms of writing history. And it's all from the standpoint, as we mentioned last week, we must have hope for those without hope. This is Benjamin's working principle, that you write from the standpoint of the victims, never history from the standpoint of the victors. He's trying to, obviously set that up, right, in so many ways. So when Warren Page says, yes, there's class struggle and my class won, he may be saying the truth in terms of socio and economic things, but to a Walter Benjamin, this is an empty temporal statement, right, in terms of history, right? Anyways, I was astonished to learn that, some of these hedge funds are buying affordable housing units.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
Gambling in this
I was
establishment.
shocked that there was gambling. Round up the usual suspects.
Right.
Right? So anyway, yeah, any thoughts? And then we can, you know, and Stanley wants everybody's emails. I think he wants to meet on December 1st. I mean, I think this is worth going back to. I don't think we're, you know, I don't know what he wants to do, but.
Was there anything else on his reading list, or was this the last? I forget.
I think he wanted to do the block, right? No?
Did he? I don't know.
Not a
That would be
thing.
good too.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think the idea is that he might do something on December 1st,
Okay.
which would be 2 weeks.
So we're not meeting next week?
No, I don't think so. Thanksgiving week, I don't think a lot of people will be here.
And what is it there was to read in the meantime?
I'll send out an email if he
Okay.
doesn't, but if I could get a piece of, if I could get you to write down your emails for me.
All right.
He wanted some. I know we have them, but it'd just be nice that he, you know.
Here, Michael.